Hi everybody, John Bailey here, gemstone artist and founder of the International Faceting Academy. Welcome back to our training facility. It's Tucson season again, and faceters and rough dealers from around the world are getting ready to make that pilgrimage. So this is the time of the year when I get the most questions about rough, buying rough, and who to buy it from. This video is my detailed answer to that sort of question, and it includes my personal perspective on where the faceting artist stands between the hole in the ground and the customer's hand in the eventual wearing of that jewelry. It's about my idea of the challenges and opportunities that come with being in that position in the gemstone trade. There seems to be an idea among faceters that the hypothetical good rough dealer will sell only the stones that have no flaws, that won't be difficult to cut, and that will guarantee you make money. You just tell them that you want a sapphire, and they're going to plunk down the perfect rough, and you'll automatically get that 60% yield that so many people talk about, right? The first thing to understand is that's not how it works. Not at all. For one thing, by the time you or I get to see the stone, the reason we're getting to see that piece of rough is that the many other faceters who have already seen it have already rejected it. We only see the stones that somebody else chose not to buy. So if by good rough dealer we mean someone who will hand us the perfect stone, maybe we want to talk to the guy selling synthetics. If we want natural stones, we have to realize that we're like a chef. We're buying raw materials from someone who knows a bunch of guys that work in the dirt. We have to remember that there are lots of imperfect items. There are opportunities to cut corners or to dress up or even to fake the goods. And it's common for sellers to make, let's say, creative claims about the quality of the things they're selling. And it's also possible for them to make honest mistakes. Woe awaits the chef who takes cooking advice from the veggie stand guy. The supplier can reasonably be expected to sort the obviously rotten from the edible and to label and weigh his goods honestly. In my experience, that proves enough of a challenge and more than many of them can manage, both technically and ethically. They can't be expected to tell this guy which items to buy or how to prepare them. That's not their job. No competent chef would tolerate the vegetable stand guy telling him how to prepare gourmet food, even if the veggie stand guy did used to scramble a mean omelet. If the rough dealer were really an expert faceter, and that stone he's pushing was really going to produce such a great return, why is he selling it instead of using his expertise to just whip out that 60% yield he's so sure you're going to get? If the supplier is honest about his sourcing, the origin, the treatments, the identification, and weighing, he's done his job. Don't beg him to stretch his competence or invite him into a blatant conflict of interest and a breach of ethics to make what legal minds would probably call a representation of economic return about what you're supposed to produce with your skills and your labor. In reality, the veggie stand guy has no idea whether the buyer is a lousy chef or a great one. Most newer faceters aren't great at predicting their own yield on a given piece of rough, partly because they aren't that consistent yet. Why would any rough dealer know what yield will be achieved by some random faceter? So, who to buy from? A short list of the good veggie stands this week won't be that useful. What if I were to give you some bright red flags to help sort out the ones that you might want to avoid, and to understand why you might want to avoid them? They're way more common than you might think. Once you see them, you might be surprised to notice who flies them. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. So before you keep watching, make sure you really want to see them. The first rough dealer red flag is that representation of return that I just mentioned. The dealer pretending to know the wonderful yield that some random faceter is going to get from a given piece of rough. The foundation of most con games is the greed of the mark, the ambition by the target that they're going to make out wonderfully. If you're an expert faceter, you already know what you can get from a given rough. And if you're not an expert faceter, why would someone suppose that you're going to achieve a certain outcome? This con game is structurally like many others unrelated to the gem industry. It lets the seller define an idealized outcome, but implicitly shifts responsibility for that outcome onto the buyer. And that structure is why representations of outcome are dishonest on their face. Here's an example I quickly grabbed from Etsy. The magic phrase to listen for is, "You should be able to." It implies that if you aren't able to, or don't manage to, then you have fallen short in some baseline version of should. In this ad, the seller says the buyer should be able to get flawless stones. But in the next sentence, the seller explicitly refuses to guarantee you won't find defects. She's telling you the stones she won't certify as flawless, but says you should be able to make them flawless? How does that work? She covers that disclaimer in the next line by following it with a guarantee that the goods will cut some really gorgeous gems. That's another representation of a return. The second time for that red flag. The beauty of that representation con game is if you aren't an expert faceter and you fail to produce the outcome fantasized, you'll come back and buy more from her because sooner or later you should be able to get flawless stones from the rough she's selling with defects. Tune your ear to listen, to notice claims of return, X, some flaw or inclusion will cut out, or these will cut Y, or you will get, or you should get. I like that last one best. When you hear that language, recognize it as the structural feature of a gaslighting con game. The second rough dealer red flag is the no-cabulary. We all know not to trust our car to the mechanic who doesn't know a crescent wrench from a ratchet handle, or anyone who uses made-up nonsense terminology to bamboozle their customers. No-cabulary is a signal clue to incompetent or a con artist in any trade you can imagine. If someone claims to be in the gem trade but doesn't know terms of crystallography or gemology, or if they use them incorrectly, or if they use made-up carny-speak nonsense that only sounds like real terms, that's the no-cabulary red flag. Now, we might carefully do business with someone who flubs the language because they are new to the trade, or they're not formally educated, or for whom English is their second language. We exercise some extra due diligence with that person, and it's all okay. But if a person claims to be professional, if they represent themselves as having experience, expertise, or education in the trade, if they fly the no-cabulary flag, ask yourself, if that person were a mechanic, would you trust them with your car? The third facet dealer red flag is the plastic halo. One of the main tricks of any con game is to get the mark to lower their guard, to trust the con artist. They get the mark to slack on their due diligence and to care a little bit less about the possibility of overpaying or buying junk. The classic plastic halo is worn by the guy who sings in church on Sunday and always puts a crispy new bill in the offering plate. The rest of the week, he's a slimy used car salesman who cheats on his wife. A plastic halo appears whenever someone spends bandwidth to advertise their supposed personal goodness rather than their actual goods. They might make it about religion or spirituality or their charity or even just their popularity. They might even do some mutual popularity parade throwing with some of their fellow carnies whenever it takes to get the Marx guard down. That's the plastic halo of someone not to buy from. The truth about rough is that it's way more about the what than it is about the who. And as long as there's a demand, someone will supply it. So in a marketplace full of amazing things, how do we sort out what to buy? Let's start with the why. I think the what is important. Remember that all rough purchases are speculative. There's a potential to end in ruin. Even expert faceters experience this and will from time to time also get ripped off by a crafty rough scammer. As a side note, I'm currently doing an entire series of videos about faceting rough ripoffs and how to spot and avoid them. You might like to watch it. The point is to treat rough purchases the way a good stock trader treats stock buys. So rough buying rule number 1, don't put all your money in one parcel or one stone. In other words, don't spend so much money on any one purchase that you can't recover if it goes badly. There are risks of misadventure, like an artist who buys a heat-sensitive material or one with a delicate cleavage and then finds their investment falling apart in their hands. Any faceter who has cut sensitive materials or those with troublesome cleavages has had this experience, I promise you. Losses can come from simple errors that anyone can make and that we all have from time to time. And there are risks in overestimating one's understanding and then misorienting a strongly pleochroic stone. Maybe we'll produce a mud-colored gem, as we often see happening with Oregon sunstone. We might make a naive decision, selecting design components or organization and overpowering a beautiful AB axis color of a tourmaline with a poopy C axis color, greatly reducing the value that we might have recovered from that stone. We could even follow some bad advice from the internet and produce a tourmaline that faces up 40% black. We see results like these on social media at least a few times a week. And I certainly paid, personally, a lot of hard knocks school tuition in stones just like this before I got that sorted out. The gem finished just over 15 carats. And luckily that was way back when rough like that was pretty cheap. By the way, on the Faceting Academy website, you'll find a page on the Secrets of Tourmaline, showing how to manage these very issues, and even providing some specific designs. I'll put a link in the comments below this video. Rough buying rule number 2 is an extension of rule number 1, and rule number 2 is diversify your rough investments. Put most of your budget in simpler and lower risk roughs that you can cut with solid confidence, with precision, and with good yield. And spend a smaller percentage, from 10 to no more than 20%, on the more complicated or higher risk things, where any losses will be sufferable and can at least be considered tuition paid into the School of Hard Knocks, if that's how a person chooses to learn. Rough buying rule number 3, review the risk to reward ratio. High value and fancy materials are fun and they're exciting to cut, but pay attention to the risk to reward ratio, or the profit margin relative to risk. For instance, top artist Dalen Hargrave is certainly capable to do incredible work with museum-sized emeralds or rubies. Yet he does loads of amazing work in materials like ametrine and smoky quartz, and not because he's selling in cheapo venues either. This is like a high-end chef who can do an incredible, complicated souffle, and who might do that on occasion, but who most days does a Michelin star-worthy carbonara that's made from very simple, robust ingredients. The value in both cases is the skillful execution of an amazing presentation, managing risks, and reliably returning a strong margin from the materials and the labor that they have invested. The whole game in faceting can be won or lost during rough evaluation, and it can also be won or lost deciding which rough an artist puts their money into for their given level of technical ability. This brings us back to what? We organize risk and challenge against margin and reward, starting with the features of gem materials that are risky or challenging, and starting with the physical features. We look for hardness less than 5 is an increase in risk. Directional hardness increases the complications. Insidious inclusions and flaws, polishing issues, cleavages, and heat shock and sensitivity. The more of these things that we find, the more skill a faceter might need to have reliable success with that particular material. The optical features that offer risk and challenges include things like color zoning, uniaxial pleochorism, or biaxial pleochorism. The farther we go down that list, the more skill an artist will need to reliably succeed in that material. And reliability and repeatability, those are the things of which consistent income is made. For instance, we want to achieve controlled presentation in simple zoned materials, like maximizing the value of a red dot Oregon sunstone, or turning a quartz phantom into an abstract of an angel, or presenting a phantom as a spider web design, or treating a blood red fleck of hematite as a colored zone and flooding the entire gem with the color. These things are less complicated than properly managing strongly pleochroic uniaxial gems like tourmaline and sapphire. And it's easy to take a perfectly viable closed C tourmaline and make it face up 40% or more black, like this 15 karat stone I did as a beginner. Presenting one of those so most people would never notice the C axis is black, that's a gem of a different color. Managing a combination of color axis and zoning in a nice sapphire like this is much easier than a controlled presentation of intensely pleochroic biaxial gems like iolite, tanzanite, or sunstone. To get across just how complicated sunstone can be, here's a photo. And here's another photo of the same stone. And another one in immersion liquid. And this photo really is the same stone in immersion liquid from a different angle. So, taking the optical features alone, a faceter might want to learn precise positive control of color in materials with even coloration, to lighten stones that are too dark and to darken stones that are too light. They might want to do that before sinking much money into strongly zoned materials. And they might want to learn precise positive control of color in simple zoned materials before sinking much money into pleochroic ones. And they might want to learn precise positive control of color in uniaxial pleochroic materials before sinking much money into biaxial ones. That's a standard progression of learning in the main optical challenges. Taking the physical features, we can reduce risks and aggravation by checking a reference book for hardness, heat sensitivity, cleavages, those sorts of things. The rule here is to take small bites of challenge at a time as one progresses in their skill, though there are some specific things worth mentioning. And here's a photo of a nice piece of amethyst rough. And here's a photo of the same piece of rough at a slightly different angle and in immersion oil. Veils in quartz can be especially insidious, making it one of actually the riskier materials to buy if you aren't educated and practiced at rough evaluation, or if you neglect your due diligence. Every faceter I know has stories about thinking pieces of quartz were clean and discovering an Easter egg of disaster. So remember that a skilled chef has an understanding of ripe, vastly more fine-tuned than the veggie stand guy. And I found that just like the veggie stand guy, Rough dealers across the board, even if they have faceted a stone or two at some point in time, they have a very different idea of what clean means compared to a skilled faceter or to the jewelers the faceters want to sell to. Always exercise your own best due diligence. At the very least, you will build skill and confidence, and usually you will save money. Another thing about quartz is the variety of interesting twinning habits, with some varieties of twinning being especially troublesome to polish. Viewed between crossed polars, this quartz with an included tourmaline needle reveals interference patterns that show twinning or strain. Now, not every quartz that shows strain or twinning interference patterns is going to for sure be a polishing problem, just like not every one that doesn't show strain patterns is guaranteed to be a breeze. Quartz is a sneaky material, and while beginners should cut some and should learn to work even with the troublesome samples, it should not be the mainstay of their rough collection. One other reason for that is that although the rough is relatively cheap, so is the perception of value by jewelers and the public. That is, until you're doing higher end work like fantasy or specialty cutting. For instance, this distinctive Phases of the Moon cut by KJ Card. That brings us to considering the margin part of the equation, and the answer to that is to go shopping for cut materials. Research venues where your intended buyers might buy goods similar to the ones you think you might be making. You want to make some calculations to figure out where to put the bulk of your rough investments, and that process is ongoing forever, and it's more involved than we can cover in this simple video. For the beginning faceter concentrating more on learning than on selling, I recommend cutting anything you can get your hands on with a hardness between 6 and 8. Anything that has no significant physical or optical challenges. And I'm not going to make a list of that here in part because the process of that research, that's part of the fun and learning. And it's one of the things you want to do in your reference book while you're walking around Tucson. As you progress, add one challenge at a time and in small bite-sized increments. In other words, don't jump directly from rhodolite to rhodochrosite. My advice is to learn to manage color in uniform materials before tackling zoned ones, and then to become precise and confident controlling zoning before progressing to uniaxial pleochroism and get that really well under control before trying to move into biaxial pleochroism. For a short list of some of the materials I do recommend, especially for beginning and intermediate faceters as you're progressing, I recommend working with garnet, especially to learn how to lighten up that darker material. It's cheap, but can offer a decent margin even in low and medium grades. Beryl is a great material to learn on, especially when you learn how to capture color in the lighter material. It can also be cheap, and it can still offer decent margin, again, even in the medium grades that you're not going to pay that much for. I'm a big fan of Oregon Sunstone and Bytownite for faceting, for learning. It's available in a wide range of prices, with the colorless and light Schiller material still pretty cheap, even in some pretty nice sizes. You can then get into some lightly colored and zoned sunstone to build the skills you want to move upward. Margin might be harder with sunstone than some other materials until you're into deep color, and you need to research your buying price and the selling price in the market. I do recommend buying small roughs. The individual pieces and even parcels are cheaper, they're lower risk, and they help building those precision and high yield skills that you're really going to rely on when you graduate up to Savorite and sapphires, where every 1/10 of a carat really counts. Arizona Anthill Garnet is a great example, but you'll find other varieties, including demantoid and things like small peridot, even though the peridot can have, it is one step up in polishing challenge, especially if you get near a cleavage. And yes, buy some quartz too. Learn to polish it, including the bad ones. Just don't center your rough budget on quartz. I point beginners to those materials while also suggesting grab smaller stones and small parcels of almost anything that's available. Variety is great for learning, and it's exciting and it's fun. Pick up things like apatite and fluorite. They're challenging, but they're cheap. If you blow them up, you're all right. Smaller spinel and sapphire are good for learning to work the harder stones. And when the price is right, try it, including spodumene. In the Faceting Academy, we have used a mix like this over a decade to propel our students through rapid advancement and in rough evaluation, project planning, precision dopping, efficient cutting, and rapid high-quality polishing. I hope you enjoyed our rough dealings video. Watch for our upcoming series on faceting rough rip-offs. Please like and comment below or ask questions. Then visit the Faceting Academy website to sign up for our free newsletter and to get technical training, business training, faceting diagrams, and more videos on things like faceting sequencing and more. When you're ready for a more in-depth education and to support more content like this video, please join our members area on the website or enroll in one of our live intensive training events. Come train with us hands-on, because professional training is far faster and it costs far less in the long run than the School of Hard Knocks. Until next time, good meets.